There's been a dramatic twist in a historic Sydney cold case with the man accused of throwing Scott Johnson off a cliff more than 30 years ago, convicted.
The man accused of throwing Scott Johnson off a cliff more than 30 years ago was recently convicted of his murder, marking a dramatic turn in a historic city cold case. Here are two other examples of cold cases being solved in surprising ways. Without further ado, let's take a look at the two cold cases that were finally solved in 2022. Susan Winters. Susan Arlene Winters was born in Oklahoma on March 14, 1966. Susan demonstrated academic and athletic talent throughout her career, and after earning a graduate degree in political science from Oklahoma University, she went on to study law. She worked for a year in the Clark County District Attorney's Office, worked at a Las Vegas law firm, and occasionally filled in as a judge in North Las Vegas Justice Court. Susan married Brent Dennis, a psychologist, in August 1995. Avis L., their first child, was born 4 years later in October 1999. In April 2002, the family welcomed a second daughter, Anna Danielle. Susan was passionate about everything in life. Despite being a hard-working solicitor, she was an avid reader, a marathon runner, an animal lover, and a devoted mother and wife. She devoted her entire free time to her family, but that would all change on January 3rd, 2015. Dennis called 911 at 6:48 a.m. That day, after discovering his 48-year-old wife Susan Winters unresponsive in bed. Paramedics arrived quickly and discovered Susan barely holding on to life. Susan was taken to the hospital, where she died at 2:26 p.m. after Dennis instructed doctors to turn off her life support. Susan died as a result of ethylene glycol poisoning and oxycodone intoxication, according to the coroner's report. The main component of antifreeze is ethylene glycol. Her death was ruled a suicide, but the strangest aspect of this case was that no evidence was found in the bedroom. When asked why his wife committed suicide, detectives discovered no suicide note, no glass with antifreeze remnants of liquid in it, and no prescription bottles or antifreeze containers. An impossible scenario if the notion of suicide was to be believed. Dennis told police that he and Susan had been fighting for a long time. Susan was drinking while taking antidepressant medication for depression and had threatened to kill herself several times. He claimed to have discovered 2 bottles of antifreeze in the garage and assumed Susan had consumed the antifreeze at some point. Dennis also stated that he slept the entire night and awoke to find Susan unresponsive. Despite the fact that Susan's death had already been ruled a suicide and the case had been closed, Winters' family was not ready to accept that she chose to end her life in 2016. Danny and Avis Winters, Susan's parents, hired retired FBI agent and attorney Tony Sergo, who filed a civil lawsuit against Brent Dennis on their behalf. The lawsuit claims that Susan died under suspicious circumstances and that Dennis was responsible for her death. Dennis was very interested in the financial benefits that came as a result of his wife's untimely death. He stood to benefit from a $1 million life insurance policy taken out on Susan's life, and he was also the beneficiary of Susan's inheritance worth $1 million within 2 days of her death. Apart from monetary benefits, he was in discussions with the insurance company Brent Dennis had a much darker secret, and the more Sergo dug, the more Dennis appeared to be a suspect. Sergo discovered many previously unseen clues in his investigation report that paint a different picture of this respected Nevada psychologist. During his civil deposition, Sergo cited potential evidence against Dennis, including an alleged substance abuse addiction and a connection to a man named Jeffrey Crosby, who had been convicted of felony possession with intent to sell cocaine. When Dennis admitted to buying drugs from Crosby, Susan was understandably upset. Susan demanded that dentists seek treatment for his drug addiction, and it was revealed that Susan had previously threatened to report his alleged drug use to authorities, according to cell phone records obtained by the family. Lawyers show that she called and texted Crosby several times in the days leading up to her death to stop him from selling drugs to Dennis. The day before she died, she told some friends that her marriage was failing. Susan's parents, Avis and Danny, insisted that Susan did not commit suicide. According to her parents, she was upset, but this did not lead to her committing suicide. In fact, Susan purchased airline tickets to San Jose, California, Atlanta, and Hawaii to attend her daughter Anna's cheerleading competitions. Susan's parents expressed their delight that Anna would be attending college soon. Dennis had previously claimed that Susan had searched for antifreeze several times before her death, leading him to believe that she committed suicide by consuming antifreeze. But months later, investigators discovered that the last of the antifreeze poisoning searches was done at 5:15 a.m., when Susan was already unconscious and nearly dead. Dennis also visited the Orleans Hotel 4 times after Crosby's death, between January 9 and March 27, 2015. Detectives decided to revisit the case in February 2017 after consistent insistence from the Winters family and armed with newfound evidence. During a traffic stop near his home, Dennis was arrested on suspicion of open murder with a deadly weapon. He was receiving prescription painkillers from his own patients at the time of his arrest. He was arrested in April of 2017 with 3 painkiller pills in his right pocket and was formally charged with voluntary manslaughter. Following Dennis' arrest, Susan's cause of death was changed from suicide to undetermined, while Dennis remained free on a $250,000 bail. 4 years after Susan's tragic death, he entered an Alfred plea in which he does not admit guilt but concedes that prosecutors have enough evidence to prove his guilt. Dennis was finally sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison for voluntary manslaughter in connection with his wife's death in 2015, and the Winter family is relieved. Susan's daughters, now 22 and 20, supported their father's statement in court, writing that their father only entered the Alfred plea in the case to avoid harsher punishment but had nothing to do with their mother's death. Kirk Weissman and Cynthia Freyer, on October 8, one of the coldest days of the year in Klamath County, Oregon, the Klamath County Sheriff's Office received a shocking call. A man had discovered 2 dead bodies while cutting firewood in a wooded area near a lake on Dead Indian Highway. When detectives arrived on the scene, they discovered the bodies of 2 teenagers, 1 male and 1 female, hidden beneath branches and shrubs. Both of the victims had sustained multiple gunshot wounds. The victims were identified as 19-year-old Kirk Weissman and 17-year-old Cynthia Freyer. People in Klamath County were taken aback by the news of a double homicide that appeared to be an abduction and a murder by a stranger. It was determined that both of them had been shot multiple times in the head with a .22 caliber pistol. A letter that Cynthia had intended to send to her mother about her hopes and dreams, as well as all the things they had done before her death, was also discovered. Retracing their steps before the murder, an autopsy revealed that Cynthia had been sexually assaulted. Kirk and Cynthia were hitchhiking in Washington and Oregon when they vanished, and police discovered that they had no connection to the area. They had planned to go to Crater Lake, a place that Frere had always wanted to see. Detectives in the case of Without a Trace in September 1978 also learned that the parents had spent the night at a Roseburg motel prior to going missing. They were later picked up by a person who claimed to have dropped the mop at a Grants Pass restaurant. But despite extensive investigation of that person, nothing further was learned about the case's other suspects. A number of people were questioned over the years, but no one was ever charged. The case quickly went cold and remained that way for almost 40 years. In 2018, pieces of Cynthia's clothing were sent to the Oregon State Police Crime Lab in Bend, where forensic scientists recovered the DNA of an unknown male. The unknown male DNA was then entered into the Cody's database, but it didn't hit on a suspect. So, investigators decided to try their luck with the new genetic genealogy technology. The unidentified man's DNA was entered into a genealogy database, and soon after, in the summer of 2021, a potential match was found. The suspect was then identified as Ray Whitson Jr., and investigators learned that Woodson had previously lived with his family in Klamath Falls between 1976 and 1982, worked at a timber mill, and was familiar with the region where the two bodies were discovered. Woodson had a criminal history, but his DNA had never been entered into the Cody's database. It was finally time to catch the bad guy after all these years, but it turned out that the suspect had passed away in 1996. Since the suspect had long since passed away, the case was immediately suspended. However, after his children agreed to provide a DNA sample, it was later determined that the DNA found at the crime scene did in fact belong to their father, Ray Whitson Jr. Detectives still believed that he had a responsibility to provide the families of the victims with evidence, including the handwritten letters, and to provide answers to the families of the Rare and Weissman victims. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.